Good afternoon and welcome to the Finance Committee for Thursday, April 20th, 2023. It's 2 o'clock and I'd like to call this meeting to order and acknowledge that the Sunshine Coast Regional District is located on the territories of the Sechelt and Squamish Nations. We do have an amended agenda in front of us today, and so directors, before we adopt, I look for any other changes or additions to make to the agenda. And if not, a motion to adopt as amended, please. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. So first up, we've got Annex A, a presentation from Corey Vanderhorst, Regional Assurance Partner, and Christy Robotham from MNP LLP Auditors. So we turn it over to you guys.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, everybody. I'm going to share my screen here. There we go. So thank you for having me here today to speak to the committee. I have a short presentation to go through, to take you through some highlights of the financial statements and financial results for the regional district, a little bit about the audit results and process, and then there'll be time for discussion and questions at the end. So diving right in, the order here, start with the financial statements, and then talk about the findings and confirm independence at the end. So starting with the statement of financial position for December 31st, 2022 for the Sunshine Coast Regional District, you can see cash and investment balances were at $62.4 million. When you add in receivables, you get a total financial asset position of $73.8 million. The regional district is carrying its own debt of $16.5 million. And total liabilities, if you add in the member municipality debt, accounts payable, accruals for employee future benefits and things like that, you get a total liability number of $45 million. If you subtract the $45 million of liabilities from the total financial asset number, you get what we call the net financial asset position of $28.8 million, which is down a little bit from the prior year's 29.5. Then there is physical assets, tangible capital assets being managed by the regional district of $145.4 million. Again, that is the historic cost of the assets that you're managing, depreciated over time to estimate the usage of those assets. And the final balance there, the accumulated surplus of $177 million, and I will get into what's in that number in a future slide. On the statement of operations, or what we used to call the income statement for the year, you can see total revenues were $58 million, up from the prior year, and also up a little bit from budget. Total expenses of $49.3 million, an increase from 2021, but below budget, and an annual surplus on an accounting basis of $9.4 million. So it's important to note that there's an annual surplus of $9.4 million, but grant funding and large amounts that come in during the year go straight into revenue. And if they are grants for capital projects, those capital projects don't show up in your expenses here. They go onto the balance sheet into that tangible capital asset number. So that can skew your results. In addition, your debt repayments, the principal portion, don't show up here in expenses. So that would also affect your results. So we'll look in, it's at the next slide or the one after, we'll look at the cash flows, and that'll give you an idea of what happened in the main bank accounts. Try and unwind some of the accounting presentation that you see in your financial statements. So when we look at the cash flows, you can see that operations at the regional district brought in $13.3 million. There's $14.3 million spent on capital projects. There's $18 million transferred into investments to make sure you're earning a good rate of return on those and not having them sit in regular bank accounts. And then your financing, if you look at 2021, there was $1 million of debt repayments. In 2022, you actually see $7.2 million of cash inflow, and then the debt repayment after. So that's a net number, meaning new debt incurred to do the capital projects, and that brought in $7.2 million. For the end of the year, the main bank accounts, the usage of cash was $11.9 million in 2022. Again, most of that being, you know, the capital projects, $14.3 million of capital spent during 2022. The accumulated surplus balance, 177,000. Most of that is that top line of what we call invested in non-financial assets. So that's the net of the capital asset balance that was on the balance sheet minus the debt that's associated with it. It's $131 million. There is $40 million set aside in reserves for future projects, for the various capital projects, money that would be allocated to electoral areas and various other reserves. Capital fund has a surplus of $8.3 million. The current fund has a deficit of 3.9, very consistent with the prior year. And then there is a final balance, what we call the MFA debt reserve cash. Again, that is a balance that is not easily accessible throughout the year. However, when debentures are repaid and get to the end of their term, so you're carrying several different pieces of long-term debt, when individual debt gets paid down, you do get a little bit of that back from the MFA in the form of a debt reserve refund. So switching gears to the audit and the audit process, we are providing an unqualified opinion again this year. So that is a clean audit opinion. We're satisfied that the financial statements are presented fairly in accordance with public sector accounting standards in all material respects. We're ready to sign our report. All the work has been completed. A big thank you to Tina and her team, Brad, and everybody who helps us out with the audit throughout the regional district. And the last step would be approval next week at the full board meeting of the financial statements. A reminder, when we're going through our audit, we look at the controls in place to ensure that you're getting accurate financial reporting. We sample transactions. We don't look at every transaction throughout the year. That's just not feasible from a cost benefit perspective, but we sample to give ourselves that comfort that the numbers that we just went through are materially accurate. And again, a big thank you to staff for their work that they do to help us with the audit process. We do confirm our independence as of today, and also projected to be continued to be independent April 27th. In your letter, you do have a mention. There's one other project we did with the Sunshine Coast Regional District to maintain independence. There was no crossover of team members between the consulting project and the audit team. And our audit does get final quality control review by an audit partner from our Fraser Valley practice, just to make sure that there's a good quality control check there. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me. I would be happy to answer any questions about the financial statements that we just went through or the audit process.
All right, thank you very much for that. And directors, do you have any questions for our auditors? Director Stamford.
Thank you, Chair. For those of us that are not super familiar with auditing terms, can you just explain materiality and why it's such a large number, 2.2 million? When I looked it up on the internet, it didn't seem to jive with that size of number. So I'm probably getting it wrong.
Thank you, Director. Yes, that's a great question. So materiality does several things in our audit. First, Swain, we calculate it as a percentage of your annual revenue. So it's meant to be sort of an indicator of the activity that's going on. So that's 3.5% to 4% of your annual revenue, somewhere around there. It does several things in our audit. One, it drives the amount of testing. We have to look at everything that's larger than that balance, and usually that's large capital projects, large grants, and then we sample underneath to make sure we're getting comfort that we can't have a material misstatement in the financial statements. And then if we find things to talk to staff about, something we disagree on the accounting treatment or an estimate or something like that, I can't give you a clean opinion if it's larger than that materiality number. If it's below that number, I could still provide a clean audit opinion because they're not material. The statements wouldn't be materially misstated. So it's important there that as we're going through and evaluating the audit results, we're looking at individual items, talking with your finance department, and if there's any disagreements, they have to be below that amount, both individually and combined. So if I had 4 or 5 items that we disagree with and they combine to that 2.2, then I wouldn't be able to give a clean audit. That has a question. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Director McMahon.
I actually do have some questions, but they're on the financial statements. So process-wise, I suppose I should wait till the next report. Would that be correct?
I think if they're, SCRD, like programming related questions, that'd be good. Yeah, okay. I don't see any other hands up though, so thank you for that presentation. I am going to ask for a motion to receive all the reports and the presentation materials, please. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. All right, moving into Annex B, we've got the Sunshine Coast Regional District 2022 Audit Findings Report and Statement of Financial Information from our Chief Financial Officer.
Thank you, Chair. And I have Manager of Financial Services here, Brad Wing, to answer any specific questions. And so we'll tag team here on some items. I do want to just share my screen because I do have a presentation a little bit to supplement the report that you have in front of you today. So essentially, a few of the items have been covered by our auditors, but really it's for public purposes. The whole purpose of our financial statements, which then goes into our annual report, is to provide information to our readers. And so one of the things public sector accounting standards doesn't do is really help readers understand what's going on with the regional district from a financial perspective. So I will acknowledge that even as a lover of all things finance. So I just wanted to bring some notes to help. And we do add a lot of these terminologies in our annual report for readers to be able to understand what things mean or don't mean. And so some of those have been hit on today. So again, we've touched on the 4 main statements in the regional district's financial statements, but one of the other areas that does provide more specific information is our schedules, which aren't specifically audited, and that's part of that materiality clause that the auditors spoke of. So it does provide readers more information on, say, what happened with solid waste services or our recreation facilities or our water utilities. But those types of things are, because we have consolidated statements, you have to get down into the statements to really understand those. So another thing that was highlighted, but we continue to stress this along the documents that we provide, which is really some understanding of terms like accumulated surplus. And I've just highlighted that it doesn't represent cash operations. So one thing that, the public may want to understand is, why are we raising taxes so much and doing those types of things when they have such a large surplus? But what's important to understand, and as it was explained, that is just an accounting presentation. And those funds are then used to later fund other things like capital investment, et cetera. Annual operating surplus, same type of thing, putting public sector accounting, annual surplus is budgeted operations and does not represent a cash surplus. So just going into the actual financial statements, some of the financial indicators that we wanted to bring to the committee's attention, and of course these are not inclusive of everything that the statements highlight, but we did want to just talk about the decrease in cash and equivalents, and that's mainly due to the change in reserves being used for capital investment, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means in some later slides. Another area that has been of a lot of financial interest during this particular time is really where we sit for our landfill closure and post-closure liability. And through the past years, it's been of great concern that there is a estimated 4.39 unfunded liability on our financial statements. And so efforts have been made through the various budgets to increase the amount that we contribute towards that particular liability. And as of 2024, we now have approximately 900,000 going towards that particular unfunded liability. It's important to note too that that liability is for not just the closure of the Seashell landfill when it's estimated to close in mid-2026, but it's the post-closure care of both that and that of the Pender Harbor facility. So it's a combined, and it's over a long period of time. We also just wanted to highlight, and we do have in the subsequent reports in this particular agenda, our status of reserves, and of course understanding that although we have 40.54 million at the end of 2022 in our reserve balances, that we have 11.8 budgeted to be expended from a net perspective. So those include all the contributions into reserves and the budgeted transfers out of reserves. So we also include some statistics within, in our annual report, but I did want to highlight them because they're germane to the financial statements, and that's really the revenues by source. So really understanding where the sources and uses of funds, and again, this is how your financial plan is presented as well. And so it really just goes back to that. So just really analyzing the financial statements and where revenue streams come from for the regional district, and a lot of them over 50, almost 55, 6% comes from property taxation and frontage and parcel taxes. But we are making some good strides in areas of grant and other sources of revenue to defer those taxes. So where did spending go in 2022? One important factor to understand with our financial statements is that that is not what you actually budgeted, it's what actually happened. And so sometimes correlating what the financial statements say against what you would expect in your budget, and knowing that a lot of our projects are multi-year budget, especially large capital investments, it's important to understand and where those particular expenses are going. So this particular chart here shows really where all the funds in the regional district went, including our capital acquisitions. So again, majority are for salaries and wages, operating goods, and we also have capital acquisitions of almost 23% last year. So this particular graph just correlates to that. So we can see that over the last few years that there has not been a significant amount of capital investment, and now we are on a significant incline, and that is reflective of our financial plan, where we're now trending over $100 million budget for 2023, with almost half of that being capital investment. So this particular trend is expected to continue on into the next couple of years. And so investments for the future. And so one of the things, looking at some financial indicators. So when looking at your financial statements, what do these tell me? So one of the areas that you may want to look at, or what's traditional to look at, is really your amortization expense. And that's based on your historical cost of your, the capital that you've invested, or your tangible capital assets. And so our capital acquisitions as of 2022 were 3.06 times our amortization. And so that's a good financial indicator of how you're doing capital renewal in your, for the regional district. So another financial health indicator is our long-term debt. And again, we've been discussing this a lot when we present the debt report to the board, but we did want to outline a little bit further as to how the particular debt is funded. And so again, this shows an incline in our debt, so that would correlate with financial statements and all the indicators that MMP provided to us. And so this, again, we have almost $20 million worth of debt scheduled to be budgeted for 2023 to pay for all the capital investments coming forward, mostly in our water infrastructure or water utilities. And so again, some other factors that you may want to look at is debt affordability. So debt servicing ratio, you can see there is a steady incline. And so there's two charts here in front of you. And so again, this is part of what the financial statements tell you, but you also want to see what you project coming into as far as a debt servicing cost. And the board does have a debt management policy, and we've been talking a lot about what our ability to cover some of our debts are in the future. And again, that's partly why we have MFA coming to us on Monday to talk a little bit about this. But our debt servicing ratio is climbing quite steadily, which in 2023 is estimated to be 10.27%. The bottom one there, where it says the difference between the debt servicing ratio estimated and the one that's 13.14% for 2023, is that of if all of the projects were completed at the end of 2023, but that's unlikely. But the reason why we wanted to present it is to show you some trend of where it's headed. And so some sober second thoughts of as we continue to fund our capital investments. So that's why such good news stories of receiving grants through the recent one for the water metering is so needed for the regional district, and why we're continuing to strive to get more grants to fund our capital infrastructure needs going forward. So there's quite a focus on that, and there's a lot of opportunities out there. So that's just a few, and I'll just stop sharing there. And if there's any other questions specific to the financial statements. Another item I did want to highlight too, Chair, is there is an amended agenda to provide the management letter. And in that, there's nothing new for 2023 as far as any management, anything for management as highlighted by MMP through the course of the audit for us to convey from a governance perspective to the board. There were some items that staff are going to continue to work on, so things like internal procedures and processes, such as the DAPR program that is on its way that will definitely strengthen some internal processes for us. So again, the items in the management letter included in the amended agenda are just a replication of the prior year, and so management has responded to those, and if there's any questions about updates on that, staff are here to follow up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, CFO Pro. I see a hand up already, but just before I go to Director McMahon, that last slide showed sort of the debt servicing ratio of where we've been, sort of where we're estimated in 2023. And I can't recall offhand, I know that we don't have a legislative limit to debt servicing. Does our policy have a limit, or is there sort of a best practices that we try and keep it under?
The debt management policy as defined by the board has pinned it against that of the community charter, which is 15%. And so one of the items that we highlighted as part of the budget process, and especially the capital planning process, is one of the areas we're strongly focusing on is we have some services that their debt servicing limit far exceeds the 15%. And so we're trading in the 25% territory, especially for the smaller local service areas, such as like wastewater facilities. So we definitely are looking at how we can mitigate or manage those. So the debt management policy speaks from an aggregated perspective for all of the regional district, but I think we have to not just look in an aggregate, we also have to look from a consolidated perspective. This one too, also, I have to verify whether or not it includes some member municipality debt, because that would not really be correlated, even though the regional district holds some sort of coverage for that or risk associated to it if anyone defaulted on it, but the likelihood of that is quite low. So again, it's just really understanding the financial health. And those are the things we're starting to look at, especially since we now have a manager of financial planning with us, that we're really focusing on the financial health of the organization and how we use all our sources of funds and how we project that into our future plans.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
Yes, well, there's lots in these statements. The unfunded liability associated with the landfill, that is the only kind of unfunded liability that's pulled out and shown to us. I assume we must have others because we have an infrastructure deficit. So why does the landfill get special attention?
I would suspect because of the impending deadline, but staff?
No, we actually don't have any other really material unfunded liabilities. We have a sick leave related one for a prior standard based on 1994, and that's part of what's on the statement here. Yeah, Schedule 1 of the statements. Just trying to leaf through as to which page that is. But all to say, we really don't. Yeah, page 61. Unfunded post-employment future benefits, and that's related to items of an entitlement that people who have been with the regional district prior to 1994 receive an additional 2 weeks of benefits. We have just a handful of those staff with us, and so that's a reflection of the unfunded, so it's expensed when incurred or when they retire.
Okay, I'm going to go to Director Inkster, and then we'll come back to you.
Hopefully this works. So I just want to ask through you to staff, when they look at the debt ratio, we were told 15%. I was wondering if Tina also had some information on what our maximum ability to borrow is at in terms of millions of dollars rather than percentage. It's a little more clear to me at that point. I also wanted to ask through you to staff the amount that, the numbers of funds that were reported in terms of borrowing. One of them is, a couple of them are clearly, it looks like water, and I'm seeing wastewater. So those are both user and specific to more rural areas, the wastewater. The water is those that are in the service. The rec facility one, though, is one that's clearly coming off the books in, I'm not sure, maybe, I'm assuming halfway through the year of 2025, and I'm asking through you if that will change the picture based on the amount we pay annually substantially of the financial ratio picture and the amount we're borrowing in 2025. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the first one is just to understand that regional districts actually do not have the same debt servicing requirements as the community charter for member municipalities. We actually don't have a maximum. So that's why some years ago there was discussion about at least putting something from a policy perspective. So there isn't actually a maximum. So as far as the financial statements in Schedule 12, so page 46 of the agenda, this particular one, as far as community recreation, yes, that is one of the larger items that we have on there, but we also, as I stated earlier, have almost $20 million worth of debt to come online that's budgeted this year. That may change slightly now that we have received the grant for the metering, because that was one of the large amounts contributed there. So we want to make even though we have those amounts coming off, we have more coming online that we have budgeted. So likely the picture will continue to climb.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
Right, so at the bottom of page 43, we have development cost charges, which we collect from developers for funding water facilities. Is that all of the water service areas? Or is that regional water, or is it a bunch of them lumped together? And how and when do we spend that money?
Thank you, Chair. So I didn't hear this last part of the question, but on page 43, development cost charges, that's combined for all of the water services. So again, in your agenda, it details how much the DCCs per service is. So that's including later, I believe, page 110 of your agenda. Yes. 110 bottom, DCCs. So that is how much we have per service area. So the majority is for the regional water service. So Chair, sorry, I didn't catch the second part of the question.
I think the second half basically is how do we spend those DCC funds, which I seem to recall through the budget process, the Keats Island, the Eastbourne water improvements, I think included a little bit of DCC funding. Or
so each DCC bylaw, I would exclude north and south because those are different. In the sense that regional waters, the DCC bylaw that was established clearly defined what the DCCs could be used for. It actually even specified specific projects out to the ministry as part of that approval of the bylaw. So things like water expansion of the water service is in there, but there is some work that needs to be done there to, I think, revise how we can use the DCCs, which I know is part of the subsequent things after the water strategy is developed.
Okay. Director McMahon, I see we're still the only hand up, so go for it.
Nobody wants to have fun with this.
Maybe they
Okay.
just expect you to ask all the questions.
Page 48, when we see it's our tangible capital assets. So sort of seems to be a bit of an imaginary number that, for instance, like all the water pipes we have in the ground, that kind of represents the money we spent on those pipes minus the amortization, but it's not like the value of the pipes if we dug them up tomorrow and tried to sell them. And it's also not reflective of what it would cost us to replace them. So, I don't know, do you have any comments on that?
I do.
Go for it.
Financial statements are not good for that because they're historical, and I believe that's why asset management, especially for public sector, is so important, because this just represents historical cost at a depreciated value, and so that's why you want to make sure that you have capital renewal plans. But in addition to capital renewal plans, you have larger master plans that also see what your future capital investment is going to be required. So for sure, one of the largest areas that we have are our water or utility infrastructures. That's going to be is our largest amount of assets next to facilities or buildings. So for sure, it's not really a good indicator as to what you're going to have to invest going forward. And I think that's really what we're seeing with the budgets now.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
I'll do one last one. So page 81, where we have our reserve funds, and some of them are a little odd, and I think I've asked this before, why on earth Area D Grant and Aid has a reserve fund? But the one I was looking at there was actually 911 telephone. We're looking at next generation 911 coming at us, and I'm just wondering should we be putting more aside in anticipation of more downloaded costs from our senior government?
Staff can most certainly take that away. I think that it's an area that's not had a focus for a capital planning. I do know that they are working on renewal of some of those towers. And so that's something maybe we can bring forward to for further discussion.
And I can actually add to that, having attended the Next Gen 911 session at AVICC, on March 1st, the province announced $90 million for infrastructure upgrades for Next Gen 911. And I asked the question in the session, does that directly replace what local governments have been asked to set aside? Because we had a motion from budget that was $10,000 a year for 5 years. And the answer from both the presenter and somebody who was in the gallery with me that is high up with the union was that, yes, so that $90 million is intended to fund local government's share of the infrastructure upgrades. So we'll see what that actually looks like when it rolls out, but there is a commitment there from the province to fund that work. So, go ahead.
True, infrastructure, but that won't cover our additional operating costs, but
No.
never mind.
All right. Are there any other questions from directors? Director Stanford.
Thank you, Chair. I can't remember what page this is on, but there is a list of vendors that we work with. And one of them is BC Ferries for $45,000 or so. I just wondered, what do we contract BC Ferries to? That's just out of interest.
Pages 90, 91, and 92 of the agenda package.
It is for function 346. It's for the Langdale float. We have an agreement with BC Ferries, and that's the
the
annual lease cost.
Okay. That's what I was wondering.
Okay. Thank you. I don't see any other hands up. Last chance, directors, or you can wave at me frantically. Director Bax?
I just wonder when is the right time for us to discuss proposed uses for our gas tax money?
Not during this conversation.
I just wanted that, well.
No, that's,
You wanted a question?
that's perfectly fair, but not when we're looking back at the last year,
Right.
so.
Question about the surplus at the Area D grants and aid. There's $3,943 that was unspent.
So that particular amount has to do when the Roberts Creek Community Hall was built, and the regional district, on behalf of the community, issued a debenture for the construction of that particular facility. And this is related to the sinking fund that was paid, that can only be used towards the particular hall. So if they do have some grant, in the past, we've used those funds for specific upgrades to the facility. I think the last one was a lighting upgrade for them.
So what you say, is this money available to use for upgrades to the community hall?
Potentially, but we can take that offline.
Thank you.
There's some nuance to it and some history, so we can make sure the director is provided that.
Thank you.
Great.
Yes, I'd be very interested in hearing about that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. On page 95, I do have a recommendation here, if somebody would like to move it for me, that the 2022 draft audited financial statements and statement of financial information be approved as presented. Moved and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? If not, I will call the question. All those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. All right, moving on in our agendas to Annex C. This is Community Benefits and Amenities Contribution Funds. And this is being turned over to Manager of Financial Planning, or CFO Pro.
Thank you. So this is a report that we provide on a biannual basis to the board. Oh, sorry, wrong report. Yes, so the Community Benefits and Amenities Contribution. There was a request prior to this board actually coming online that we started to wanted to know more information about amenity contributions. So there are amounts that the regional district has received that were not being reported as part of the reserve accounts. We used to just really focus on things like DCCs, gas tax, and our reserves. So there were other known funds that we had. So now we're providing a more holistic report out to the board and the public. So there was also a request to provide some history on the particular funds and what they could potentially be used for. So that's what this particular report is all about, is to provide a little bit about what some of the commitments for those uses of funds and the amounts that are there in those particular accounts. So happy to take any questions if there are any.
Director McMahon.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention for the benefit of new directors that the reserve or the amount that we have there to support agriculture has been a challenge because of the fact that farms are considered businesses and we cannot, under legislation, support a business. So we have money there that somehow could and should be used to support agriculture, but we haven't been able to figure out how to do it yet.
Maybe with water?
So thanks.
CFO, I see your mic on.
There may be some ways we can explore, especially since I believe there's a few reports coming to the committee next week. So perhaps this could be contemplated as part of that. I also wanted to note, Chair, there is a motion here just to move some funds that were miscoded. And so it's just to move them from general government to the appropriate fund.
Thank you. The numbers that are in the table are representative of the money being sitting where it's supposed to be sitting, or is that, okay, thank you. Director Stamford, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So that's following that clarification, when you say the balance remaining for Box Canyon is 40,000, or is it 20,000 after we move that money, or is it 60,000 when we move that money?
40,000.
Okay, so a follow-up?
Yeah.
Will staff be providing recommendations as opportunities to use that money, for instance, for Box Canyon? Will that be coming to the board, or does the board, is there an expectation that the board members will be making recommendations as to how to spend that?
Yeah, so just on the staff report on page 104, it does say that for next steps, at this point, we're not asking for any direction on proposed uses of those particular funds. Some are already encumbered, and staff are aware, and so those will be put forward as part of any future budget proposals, and or could be contemplated if any changes within the existing project complement.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
Right, back to the agriculture money again. Do we, because we've had this in the bank now for a number of years, so do we accrue any interest on these funds?
We are now. We're now investing them.
Thank you. Did you have a follow-up, Director McMahon? Nope, okay. I don't see any other hands up. We do have a recommendation on page 102. And moved by Director McMahon. Do I have a seconder for that? Seconded, thank you. And I don't see any other hands up, so I'll call the question on the motion. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. And I think that concludes Annex C. So moving on to Annex D, we've got status of reserves and holding funds as of March 31st, 2023. And I think this report's just here for information. If directors have any questions, now would be the time to ask. I'm not seeing any hands up, so thank you. I suppose that speaks to the quality of the reporting, that there are no questions to be asked here. So moving on, we are looking at Annex E in our agenda package, which is the Canada Community Building Fund Community Works Fund update. And again, this is just for information, if directors have any questions. No hands up. I don't see anybody. I don't see anybody frantically waving, so I think that's it for the Community Works Fund as well. So, okay, thank you for that. We don't have an in-camera session. We don't have any communications or new business. So with that, I'll look for a motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you very much. We are adjourned. And I see no virtual attendees, and there's nobody here, so thank you and goodbye.